For more now from the National Cathedral, CBS Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, what an incredible celebration of life.
It was, Rena, and the kind of send-off that is really reserved for American heroes. I mean, here you had generations of U.S. leaders from the right and the left on a Labor Day weekend gathered here at the National Cathedral to pay tribute to a senator, a former POW, and perhaps most importantly, a father. And we heard from Meghan McCain for the first time, who was overcome as she talked about the lessons that she learned from this grizzled war veteran who literally made her get back onto the horse when she fell off and broke her collarbone. And she didn't understand, she said, at the time when she was a child, why it was so important for him that she get right back on. But she understands now as a woman the message that he was trying to send. There were a lot of messages that he tried to send with the makeup of this service today, most pointedly by asking two former presidents, one a Democrat, Barack Obama, one a Republican, George W. Bush, to eulogize him. Both of these men, as we've discussed before, bested him in his twin bids for the presidency. And if he was hoping that that would send a signal that it is more important to put character and values, the kinds of things that unite all Americans above politics, well, that message came through loud and clear because both Presidents Bush and Obama articulated just that.
You know, Nancy, I'm curious what stood out to you from those former presidents eulogizing John McCain.
Well, they talked about the fact that he abhorred the abuse of power. They talked about the fact that he made both of them better presidents, even despite the fact that they disagreed with him sharply from time to time, and he was no doubt a thorn in their sides. And even though they didn't say it directly, Rena, clearly the subtext here was a rebuke of the leadership of Donald Trump, or at least the way that he speaks about this country and speaks about some of his adversaries, because Barack Obama made a point in his remarks to talk about the cheapening of American discourse and the need to get back to the values that John McCain espoused. And it couldn't have been any more clear, because at the same time that all of this was going on, the presence of President Trump, or the lack of his presence, was still felt. He obviously was not welcome at this ceremony, and he spent the time tweeting about various adversaries, a former Secret Service agent, the Russian investigation, DOJ, FBI, and even at one point Canada, before he headed off to his golf course in Virginia. And so while his daughter was here, it was very notable that the current president of the United States was not among those who had come to pay their respects to John McCain. And you know, even though it was never spoken by George W. Bush, by President Obama, or Meghan McCain, even though they never said his name, they left no mistaking who it was that they were talking about.
You know, you mentioned the senator's daughter, Meghan McCain. She gave a beautiful speech, and it was just so hard to watch her this week, see her just visibly moved and emotional. I want to play a bite for you from her eulogy.
We gather here to mourn the passing of American greatness. The real thing, not cheap rhetoric from men who will never come near the sacrifice he gave so willingly, nor the opportunistic appropriation of those who live lives of comfort and privilege while he suffered and served.
Nancy, what stood out to you from her speech?
You know, we've heard many times that it really didn't bother John McCain personally, that Donald Trump called his heroism into question, said that he didn't know whether McCain was a hero because he was captured, and that President Trump, then a candidate, liked people who weren't captured. We've always heard that he really didn't care that President Trump went on to criticize him so many more times over the years, and certainly McCain had plenty of criticism for President Trump himself. But clearly, listening to Meghan McCain's voice shaking there, his family was bothered by it. And you got the sense listening to her today that she just had some things that she needed to get off her chest. And she returned to the theme at the end of that eulogy when she said that there was no need in John McCain's America to be great again because America was always great. And that was a line that got applause from many of the 4,000 people who were sitting here in the National Cathedral. Perhaps not from the Senate's Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, or the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, but there was a lot of agreement on that point. And once again, this was a memorial service. This was a send-off to someone who served this country both in Congress and in war. But it was clearly something else for a lot of the people who were here as well. It was meant to send a message about American values and American discourse.
So well said, Nancy. It really was a message about something else as well. I want to ask you, though, about Joe Lieberman. He gave really some interesting remarks reflecting on the time that McCain asked him to actually be his running mate. Here's a soundbite.
In 2008, when John was the Republican nominee for president, he had this far-out idea of asking a Democrat to be his running mate. Can you believe that? Let me explain it to you. As he did. When he first talked to me about it, I said, you know, John, I'm really honored, but I don't see how you can do it. Even though I won my last election as an independent, I'm still a registered Democrat. And John's response was direct and really ennobling. That's the point, Joe, he said with a certain impatience. You're a Democrat, I'm a Republican. We could give our country the bipartisan leadership it needs for a change.
Bipartisan leadership. Nancy, you have covered him for so long. I'm curious, what is it that you'll tell your children about the John McCain you knew?
I think I'll tell them that he never shied away from a fight. But he also never shied away from extending his hand to the other side and trying to work out big problems. You know, part of the frustration of covering Capitol Hill these days is that when you talk to lawmakers from the right and the left independently, they often agree privately on what some of the solutions could be to major problems that are plaguing this country. They all know where the middle is, and they all know what the sensible solution would be. And yet, political concerns prevent them from hammering out an agreement that would be palatable to both sides and would actually do some good. And that can be very disappointing to see at close range. And John McCain was one of those people. Perhaps it was because of his background. Perhaps it was because he spent 5.5 years as a prisoner of war. Perhaps it was because he so often said what he thought and was so transparent that, he got a pass from some of the political constraints that held back other politicians. But he did extend his hand and work with folks from the other side on immigration, on campaign finance reform, on foreign policy, on defense. And he wasn't always successful, but he tried, and he continued to try after a lot of other people gave up. And that is something that was very admirable and showed that he himself was willing to get back on that horse again and again.
So well said. Nancy Cordes, Chief Congressional Correspondent. Nancy, thank you very much.
You're welcome, Rena.